Welcome to Richplanet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. In 2010, today's guest published what is arguably the most important book of the 21st century. She is a former professor of engineering mechanics with degrees in civil engineering, structural engineering, applied physics and materials engineering science. Her book, entitled Where Did the Towers Go?, provides the only comprehensive scientific investigation into the events of 9/11 in the public domain. The conclusions are staggering, which are that two of the world's tallest, strongest buildings and most of their contents were literally turned to dust by an advanced, covert energy weapon. Not by planes, not by bombs, and not by nukes, but by a non-kinetic energy weapon. Welcome, Judy Wood.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Or should I say Dr. Judy Wood? Now, we'll just start, Judy. You've come to the UK quite recently and you've been on a lecture tour. Can you just give us a brief outline of that?
Of where I've been?
Where you've been and how it's been received.
It's been received very well, and I feel lucky to be amongst such wonderful people who appreciate understanding and who really want to know about what's going on, rather than being alive and thinking, rather than just going along with whatever flow and just being led down whatever path.
This is what actually happened. What you've seen tonight is what actually happened. It's not a theory.
This is slow motion, and there are various pieces falling, but notice they're trailing dust. And there's a piece that'll emerge right in here, and watch how it trails dust and then it runs out of dust because it's gone. This piece right here.
So what kind of subjects did you lecture in then?
I lectured in mechanics of materials.
Mechanics of materials, okay.
Does it strike you through the powder?
Yeah, I mean, that's right.
Been to Penzance, Brighton, the outskirts of Brighton, and then Gravesend, and then near Manchester, and then Northampton, and then tomorrow we go to
Aberdeen?
Aberdeen, thank you. Aberdeen, and then Edinburgh, and then Glasgow, and then down to Cardiff. Okay,
and viewers can watch the two previous interviews that I did with Judy Wood because there's quite a lot of detail in those interviews. Prior to the tour that you're doing now, you spoke at an energy conference, a free energy conference, was that?
It was about new energy. They call it breakthrough energy, the breakthrough energy movement, because I think free energy has gotten a bad name and it has bad connotations with it. But it was a wonderful conference put on over 3 days just outside of Amsterdam.
Amsterdam.
Yeah, in Helversum, I think the name of the town. It was terrific people, and it was interesting. The last night, it's like nobody wanted to leave and say goodbye, and we're up till 3 a.m. talking.
So a lot of the speakers there are putting forward the case that there are certain technologies which have possibly been suppressed, which would solve the world's energy crisis and get us off fossil fuels.
That's what the aim is.
Okay, and were there any extremely convincing technologies discussed at that conference?
I wasn't so much looking at that. I'm looking at more of the direction I'm coming from, which is a demonstration of free energy technology rather than it's right around the corner, it's right around the corner. We hear that so much, and sometimes it's for real and sometimes it's a distraction. But what I found there is people were very receptive to what I was showing. They had originally poo-pooed it and were convinced that I was talking nonsense because they'd heard that from others. But I had a wonderful reception. People sort of turned 180 degrees.
Because what you're saying is that somebody already has this technology, yes, and they've used it
and
in the form of
demonstrated to us.
Yeah, demonstrated to us in the form of a weapon.
Yes.
Which we will come on to. So you describe it as a non-kinetic weapon. Can you just for viewers describe the difference between kinetic and non-kinetic?
Well, kinetic being like heat. Nuke bombs have a whole tremendous amount of heat. Or regular bombs, chunks go flying, break things into parts. Missiles, something moves and hits something else, wrecking balls, something pounding on something or heating something up. But there are other types of weapons that don't heat something, but affect it. What I mean by directed energy, the energy is, in the most general sense, it's directed geographically only to affect this particular place and not across the street. But also, the energy is directed as in giving it instructions what to do differently than energy normally does.
All right, so it's not just directed in terms of its position, it's directed in terms of its instructions. That's what
Yes,
you're saying.
yes.
Because the equation that I remember from physics of a kinetic energy weapon would be the energy in a cricket ball. If you throw a cricket ball, that's a kinetic energy weapon, is a half mv squared, which is a half times the mass of the cricket ball times its velocity squared, gives you the amount of energy in that energy weapon, because a cricket ball is an energy weapon, really.
We're sending somebody in croquet, you know, you get two balls, you put your foot on one, you whack this one, that one takes off.
So this is non-kinetic.
Right.
Right. Now, does that mean it's electromagnetic, or can you explain what it actually is?
It's various things. What I call it is magnetic electrogravitic nuclear reactions. It involves magnetism, electricity, gravity, and it causes nuclear reactions.
Right. And one analogy that people can think of is their microwave oven as being an example of directed energy.
Yeah, or lasers.
Or lasers.
Those are line of sight, or I guess microwave sometimes is in a region, but this is a combination of different types of energy that create different effects and interact.
Right. Now let's just summarize the reason why you state that the towers didn't hit the ground.
Well, they didn't burn up, nor did they slam to the ground, but turned into dust in midair. And we know that because if they slammed to the ground, we'd have a pile of rubble left over. If they slammed to the ground, the seismic signal would have shown that, which it didn't. And if they slammed to the ground, they're actually built in the Hudson River, 70 feet below the water table on bedrock. And so there's this dike around them. You get two 500,000-ton buildings and another 250,000-ton building and slam it down, you're going to bust the water retaining wall.
And there's a whole lot of other evidence concerning things that were made of metal that were isolated from the ground, such as cars that had all of these bizarre effects that you wouldn't have expected if two buildings had collapsed through a conventional means.
The effects were material specific.
All right. Now, normally you would focus strictly on the physical evidence, and you have done so far in your book and in your lectures. But this time in this tour, you're speaking more about the cover-up of this information and how that cover-up has been orchestrated and the psychology behind it. Can you just explain that for us, Judy?
Yes, the buildings turned to dust in midair. If you look at it, you can see that. Why do so many people not see it? Why was nearly the entire world fooled that day? And in order for people to see what happened, they have to figure out how to get around this. And I found there's three things that keep them from seeing it. Number one, problem-solving skills. Number two, groupthink or peer pressure. And number three, they're terrified by the implications. But of the problem-solving skills, I've said this before about the importance of first determining what happened before you can determine how it happened. You have to determine what it is, and that before you can determine who did it or why they did it and so forth. And what I've discovered is one of the easiest ways to run a cover-up and to keep the cover-up safe is to get folks to focus on how it happened. Because if you start out with how it happened before you've determined what it is, you're assuming what it is. So you're solving an imagined problem, not a real problem. You haven't defined the problem. When I teach in statics class, first thing you have to teach students is to make the problem statement. Here's the problem statement. Here's what you're looking for. Here's the information given. Draw a line, what you're going to look for. Draw a line, go about solving it. And you have to define that problem before you can solve it. Once you define it, it gets a lot easier to solve.
Right.
And few people do that. So if you get people to focus on how it was done, they go round and round arguing about opinions of whatever, and they never will solve it.
And they will create contention within that as well. I've actually, in my talks, called it a phony bone of contention, which is contention around something which has a flawed assumption
Right,
within it.
and it goes round, 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 round.
Okay. All right. And I know that Andrew Johnson has spoken at length and written a book about the 9/11 cover-up.
Yep. Another thing that I often talk about, you know, if you don't like the lie behind door number 1, they'll show you lie behind door number 2. You don't like that one, lie behind door number 3. Whatever to keep you from looking at the open field behind you.
And you talk about the psychology of denial because the implications are just too grotesque for people to face. And I'm actually experiencing that with some British members of Parliament that I've been writing to about another thing, which is the 7/7 London bombings. And I would describe them as being in, well, some kind of psychotic state, which is it's denial. They're not even looking at the evidence.
Do you remember in first grade, there was usually, at least when I was in first grade, that's what it was going on, about Santa Claus, the Santa Claus myth. And some kid would tell others that Santa Claus doesn't exist, and they'd all get mad at him. No, it does exist. And some kids would be crying if they learned about that. I guess kids are actually learning earlier now because they're exposed to that. But the anger in that, it's just like the end of the world. To learn that what they know doesn't exist, or to learn that their parents lied to them in this con job, and actually think it might be a good thing to help them get used to the idea that they can be conned.
Now, for those who actually question whether or not the towers did in fact turn to dust in mid-air, there's a clip which I don't think I've shown on Richplanet before of, if you just describe this clip, Judy, I don't think I've seen this one.
If you look at this is the northwest corner of the North Tower. You see that vertical line near the center of the image, and you'll notice in a little bit there will be a whitish beam that you'll see dropping down. And it'll emerge, and as it emerges you see this opaque trail of dust behind it. And it becomes clearer and clearer, it's trailing dust, then pretty soon it runs out of dust to trail because it no longer exists. It becomes dust. And then when you look at it at full speed, you not only realize this beam is doing that, but everything in the image is doing that. And if you look down at the intersection right after where that stuff was falling, it's not there. It's just paper.
Now this process, which we're seeing in that image, you have linked it to something which is akin to or similar to cold fusion. And in a cold...
It has a lot of similarities with what was called cold fusion, low energy nuclear reaction.
A low energy nuclear reaction. And this was something which was covered up in the late 1980s, early 1990s.
Yeah, 1989.
Right, and so it's a technology which you think was taken over by the military, presumably.
Yeah, I never know when, officials have it. If it pops out in the public domain, maybe they may try to shut it down. I have a feeling that, top secret places, wherever, black technology, it's there already. But in 1989, this popped out. It's the work of Pons and Fleischmann. But the significant thing that was discovered then was this type of reaction. It was through electrolysis, an electrolytic process, and they found transmutation, different metals forming on the electrodes that, they don't know where it came from. It indicated there was a nuclear process going on, as well as the tritium that was measured. And tritium, up until that point, had only been found in like nuke bombs, where you get other types of ionizing radiation, the kind of thing where Geiger counters are going to go off, that you would find. And they were first saying that Pons and Fleischmann were bogus because of this only tritium and not the other. And John Bockris actually was the first to discover this tritium, and somebody wrote this nasty article, I think in Science magazine, saying he must have spiked his sample with tritium, because why else isn't this other stuff there? And Pons and Fleischmann would be dead if this really was. So there's a lot of data on that, and it's been sorted out.
We can put this graph on the screen, which is what was measured at the World Trade Center site after the events. Just explain the graph for us, Judy.
On the right-hand side, you'll see a logarithmic scale, and I've given samples of different things that have been measured. Over on the left-hand side, at the bottom, you'll see it starts at 1963 to about 1990, and it's showing the decrease in the tritium levels in the Great Lakes. And that tritium was there because of atmospheric nuclear bomb testing. And you can see it decreases, and it has a half-life of about 12.5 years. The next one over is current measurements in the Great Lakes. And then the yellow one in the middle is the actual measurements that were taken shortly after 9/11, where there's these very high levels of tritium that are not just random high normal. There's definitely a source of something that put tritium there.
So the appearance of this thing called tritium, which is
indicates, there's no doubt there was some sort of nuclear reaction going on.
Right.
It actually absolutely confirmed. Now, there also was no ionizing radiation recorded. Nobody with Geiger counters came around and found anything. And if you remember Chernobyl, I've got a diagram in the book and with a question asking, do you think they could have kept Chernobyl a secret? Because it shows the measurements all around the planet of the fallout from that. And there was no such measurements on 9/11.
Yeah, because this is one of the three alternative theories that people put forward, is that it was done by some kind of nuclear weapon.
Somebody around the planet would have been measuring it.
Right, so there would have been fallout measured around the site of 9/11, and there was no fallout radiation, but there was the presence of tritium.
Yes.
So the process of cold fusion is something which creates tritium in those sort of quantities. So you think it's something similar?
That, yeah, and the third one, I mean the fourth value over is values that you measure in LENR, low energy nuclear reactions, or cold fusion. And at the far end of the scale is what comes from, the source is leaky nuclear plants, which is sky high. It's like 18,000 times what was measured at the World Trade Center. So the closest, if you look at the order of magnitude measured, was low energy nuclear reactions of all those choices of the sources. And if you have fire hoses on it and so forth, you're going to get it pretty watered down.
Richplanet TV is coming to a town near you. In May 2013, I will be travelling around the UK, speaking at the following places: Gateshead, Glasgow, Leeds, Liverpool, Birmingham, Weston-super, Southampton, Reading and London. I'll be covering recent UFO reports, which is not to be missed, and exposing a range of issues you won't find discussed on mainstream TV. Get ticket details from the richplanet.net website.